Welcome everyone to Learn to Listen. This week we are joined by Bev. Hello, I am so happy to have you here today. We've already actually been on a podcast
Yes.
together through Athletes for
Mm-hmm.
Hope. So I'm so excited to go again. But
Yeah.
Bev, if it would
Thank you
be,
for having me.
yes, yeah, if you could intro yourself for our listeners, that would be wonderful.
Yes, of course. Well, I'm so excited to be here. I know you mentioned that we did the thing together for Athletes for Hope, and obviously we immediately connected. So I'm really excited to do this today. But yeah, my name's Bev. I played 10 seasons in the NWSL, and I am currently one of the assistant coaches at Gotham FC. I'm really excited to give back to the league in a different way. Obviously, if you will, in a different seat at the table. And so, yeah, it's been really fun. It's been really exciting. And I'm just excited to be here today and dive into some mental health stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I'm so excited. Well, we're going to get it kicked off. So when we spoke last about, it was mainly around like transitioning away from sports. So before I dive into kind of some other questions around that topic, when I listened back to the episode, which I don't know if you did, but it's always like so fun. I have to remember. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
treat when you're listening to yourself, you're like, okay, pretend like you're an outsider listening in,
Yep.
right? Like
Yep.
try not to be super hypocritical, but I mean, I was still so fascinated by everything that you were saying, and I was so happy we had the opportunity to do so.
Mm-hmm.
But and so it was kind of both when we like stepped away from sports, that's when we realized how intricate like our identity was to the sport. And so
Yep.
I wanted to ask you kind of like a follow-up question, and I'll link the previous podcast episode so anyone who's interested can go listen to it. But how did you actually transition away from sport and go know that you wanted to go into coaching? Because I feel like that is a like for me at least, I knew at the end of my athletic career, I was like, I don't think coaching is in my
Mm-hmm.
wheelhouse right now. So how did you kind of
Yeah.
know like that's what you
Yeah.
wanted to do?
It's such an interesting question because I feel like now being in the position I'm in, I've reflected on so many times throughout my career when I was playing and coaching
Mhm.
that I actually really felt when I coached, I was a better player because everything that I was explaining to these young kids, even in reference to the very basic things, which I think a professional athlete is someone that's very good at the basics and exceptional in one or more areas. But they're so good at the basics, right? And so when I'm there and I'm coaching these kids, check your shoulders, get your body shape right. Can he be on the half turn? Can you see 3 corner flags at all times, right? On the field? Can you see the biggest percentage of the pitch? And I felt like every time I was coaching these small little details, I was reminding myself, even at that level, that I'm not doing it enough. And so I actually felt like it made me a better player. And I think, in reference to what it brought to my game as I was still playing, I just grew a passion for it very naturally. And how much I wish I would have known at a certain age, it didn't matter if I was coaching 13, 14, 15. I'm like, if I only knew this when I was 15, if I only knew this when I was 13. So that really started to jumpstart the process. But yeah, I actually started coaching while I was playing and actually ran my own soccer coaching business um, early on in the league when the pay was pretty tough. It's obviously growing and getting better in so many ways, but I essentially had to have something on the side in order to continue playing. And I was lucky enough to find a passion of mine. So pretty
Yeah.
wild how it all works out.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, okay. That's so fun. Yeah, I can't believe we didn't even kind of go over that, like how, we
Yes.
both got to where we were, but I always think it's so
Yeah.
interesting
Well, and it's funny
to
too, because
ask.
like, and there's so many times that I've played with players where I'm like, you are literally one of the best female players I've ever played with. And they were like, I will never coach. I'm like, why not? You've got to have like the most incredible brain for the game. There's no way, you're so good. And it's just like, I just don't have a passion for it, or, whatever the case
Mhm.
is. But it's really funny that throughout my career, I found a lot of people that are just like, there's no way, like much like you said, I was done and I had no, want to coach. And I've met so many people like that. And I've met some that are like, I want to dive into it and see what it's about. But it is pretty split for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's like too, it's like just a
Mm-hmm.
different to be able to teach something versus like do it yourself, right? Like that is such a mind shift. And I've coached like for our high school rowing team. And so I definitely it was a different mindset, which I love that you brought up of you having that perspective. Like when
Yeah.
you were coaching, it was at the front of your mind. You're like, oh, I'm telling these kids or whoever it
Yeah.
is that I'm coaching, like they should be doing this. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like you kind of catch
Yeah.
yourself and you're like, I'm
Yeah.
saying this, but am I really doing this? Like, the rest of the time. So it's definitely like top of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that was like the best part about it was, and it helps me continue to have a growth mindset. I don't think I've ever had a mindset of like, I'm here, been there, done that, kind of dust my hands off and just sit at the table. I've always kind of had that mindset of I can always be better at something. It was almost to a fault because I was so hard on myself, right? And was like, I couldn't take the little wins. It was like everyone's like, pat yourself on the back. I'm like, you're right. But I just had to want to be so good at what I was doing that when I started coaching, I found those details and I saw, like, after weeks of working with a specific player or a small group, and you see their improvements and it's like, oh my gosh. But I was once told from someone that I really admire that the coach never makes the player always makes a player. And so there's some piece to it that I've carried on in reference to that quote to my coaching career of, you can do everything right in the coaching sense. And to me, it's always the players that are the ones that are they have the willingness to intake the information and execute it. And they have the willingness to want to be better and the willingness to learn more. But I don't believe that a coach ever makes a player. And
okay. Yeah.
Really interesting to me to now go through that process because I heard it as a very, 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 very young coach. And now to be in the position I am now and seeing even players at this level improve on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a season basis. Like it truly never ends in reference to your development. You're just constantly developing. And so I enjoy it because I feel like as a player, it's hard to see because you're so hard on yourself and you're so like, you don't, but as a coach, I can't believe how much my perspective has changed and how broad my mindset has been in regards to seeing the little improvements or seeing the little developments and just being so happy to see it. You're like, you're doing it. Oh my gosh. It's exactly what we spoke about, And so it's literally the most fulfilling thing for me as a coach to see those little things come and flourish.
Yeah, well, okay, so I definitely want to dive into that. So why do you think like that shift happened where you were like, okay, I'm able to see like the little things? And I mean, I would have loved to have had you as a coach in my athletic career because like, I mean, it just sounds like you're so in tune with seeing those improvements, right? And like acknowledging them. And I think that's what feeds into an athlete's willingness, into their dedication and development. Like if someone else is noticing it, because we tend to be way harder on ourselves than other people. Yeah. So like just having someone be that voice and be like, no, I see that you're really working on what we talked about. Like you're really improving. Do you think it's that switch is because like from the athlete to the coach mentality is like, now it's outside of yourself? Or was there like something that you were very conscious about, like being a coach, you were like, okay, now I'm purposefully going to spend time dedicating, like giving feedback back that is really like helpful and very in tune with what like each athlete needs?
Yeah, no, it's an incredible question. I think there's kind of a twofold answer to it. And I'd say that I think just becoming a coach, your vision goes amongst the 24 players, the 28 players, right? Your vision's kind of spread across with those players in particular. As a player, you very much so see yourself and yourself within a team, right? So not in a selfish sense, but you definitely see yourself a lot more, and the focus is in a bigger percentage of an area, if you will, over being a coach and seeing several players. So definitely think the mindset and the shift of now I'm a coach and I'm, helping oversee 28 people in reference to, come on, Bev, that wasn't good enough. Come on, Bev, that wasn't good enough. That was fantastic. Okay. You need to be more like that. I also think as a player, when, at least for me, video was huge. Every time we had an opportunity to go over a film, every once in a while I'd be like, dang, or I'd go and see my GPS system. There was once in my career that I was told, I need you to be a box-to-box player. I need you to cover ground. I need you to be able to come back, defend as much as possible. And I also need you in the box every opportunity you get. And I was just like, this is impossible. Like, what? And sure enough, towards the end of the season, with the belief of someone and the training of someone, at the end of the season, I was covering the most ground consistently amongst the team. And I never thought I had that in me. And so I've been able to come through those trials and, triumphs in, wow, somebody believing in me that I was capable of something and creating a training environment to get that out of me. And then to be able to succeed something that I was like, there's no way at age 32, I'll ever be able to accomplish that. Oh, wow, I did. So it kind of changed my mindset going into coaching. But I definitely think that the broad view is, and at that is very difficult. Like sometimes I come home and I'm like, how long has it been since I've kind of pulled this player aside, right? Like, even though there's 3 of us, well, there's technically 4 if you include the goalkeeper coach, right? Even though there's 4 of us and you've got 28, 24 players, it's hard. It's hard to manage, like giving what you feel each of those players deserve. And it's hard to manage. And I never knew that. Like as a player, I was always like, oh, I feel like he talks to this player more and, she talks to her so much more. And I only wish, and I can't tell you how many times I reflected on this. I only wish I had an opportunity to see a coach's perspective as a player, because I definitely think my mentality would have changed. So many hours goes into it. You are working nonstop to the finest details of what the other team's doing and what we need to do to stop them.
Yeah.
And everything about us in reference to how we're going to play, how we're going to press, how we're going to defend. It's endless all the way up until the game. And then you go, okay, here we go. Let's see how it goes. And then after the game, you start rewatching, you start clipping, you start going, and you go again. You get rid of the last game, you recap it, and then you start building towards the next game. And it's absolutely nonstop. And I feel like when I showed up, it was like, okay, the field was set. And it was like, oh, I wonder what we're doing today. And I'd come in and I'd go, oh, that drill was okay. This drill was fantastic. It was okay day. But I never truly comprehended what actually went into it. How many hours of planning and how many hours of tweaking a drill just to ensure that it's something that our midfield will experience in reference to what they're going to experience on the weekend. And tweaking little things throughout the week to make sure that it's exactly what we want from the group. And I think if I had had that early on, I always respected the coaching staff and I always respected the time that was put into it. But I don't think I ever truly understood as an athlete how much time went into it and how difficult it is to give everybody the attention that's needed. And how do you balance it? Some people need the, hey, the coach on the other team said you're our weakest player, and, show them that you're not. We believe in you. One player might be able to go, holy crap, okay, and play lights out. And another player will go, oh my gosh, that totally didn't motivate me. They think that's what I play like. Oh my gosh, that must be what I'm like. Oh my gosh, this must be the case. Right. And so it's also finding those, right? What makes the player tick and what just totally demotivates the player. And, I'm still learning those relationships as an assistant coach. And so sometimes I can feel a bit defeated. I come home and I'm just like, I always feel like I can sleep at night and put my head on the pillow knowing that I've given the group everything I possibly can. And I'm attempting to treat people the way that I would like to be treated, right? In reference to obviously being a coach. But it can feel very defeating at times where it's just, you're mentally just so exhausted because you're just so concerned all the time about your entire group.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much like that goes into everything that you were just saying, like the dynamics between a coach and an athlete. And so I feel like, so you were saying like having the belief that like someone, if you're, say, the athlete, you have the belief of the coach, like, they believe in you, and that will help you like persevere through the trials and tribulations. Do you think like that it was because you had that experience when you were an athlete that you are now able to like give that experience back and like putting the belief back into others? Because I feel like exactly what you're saying, like it's so hard because I myself, like I am sitting in that seat, having my athletic career behind me, but I'm like, I don't, same like you did not until you were a coach. I don't have that perspective of like at that level, what goes into all the different planning, and likewise, like always respected my coaches, but you can't relate to something until you truly see it and understand it and like understand the emotions and are close enough to see that. And so just hearing you kind of talk about that, like I'm naturally an empathetic person. So like putting myself in those shoes, but you can only do that so much until it's your own experience,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's just it, right? Like coming into the role that I've come into, I think I said this on the last podcast. There's been so many times that I've just spoken to players and just said, don't overthink it. Right. There was so many times that I was like, why am I not playing? Like, I was in such a narrow space because to me, I was outperforming, and to me, I should have been playing and starting. And I've realized that, even when it comes down to the littlest things, you can be at your absolute best. And this is one of the best advice that I've ever been given from someone very, very special to me is basically, a specific player could be doing everything right and someone else could be doing everything right. And depending on the game's needs that weekend, that's why that specific player is chosen.
Yeah.
And it could feel defeating because you're like, I've done everything right. I've done everything to my ability. I've been playing absolutely lights out Monday through Friday. But so as the other player, and depending on what the team needs are for the weekend and depending on who we're playing, could pick and choose someone, right? From starting or not starting, from rostering or not rostering. And it's a very stressful process. And I think I never realized as a player that it's exactly your job. And I think that I didn't focus enough on this job. Your job is to make sure the coaching staff can't sleep at night because they don't know who to pick. That's the controllable, right? That's the controllable. Yeah. You've caused such a problem with the way that you're playing, how great you are in the locker room, what you mean to the group, and character. Character is a huge piece of it, piece of it, because it's like, well, this player's so professional with how they're taking this, right? And it's a huge part of it. And so I think you just get to that point where it's like, your job is to ensure that we are losing as much sleep as possible to pick and choose who we're going with and why we're going with them. Right. And I just don't think I focused on it enough. And I was always the first to go, well, the coach is this and the coach is that. Right. And now being on the other side, I'm like, if I could give them the opportunity to just go, hey, you guys, I know what you may be thinking, and I don't know for 100%. But I guarantee whatever you think about what we talk about in there is exactly what I was thinking. And it's not the individual player for 7 hours a day, and just sometimes the mindset, you can't help but assume that not everybody thinks that, right? But I can definitely sense and see an overthinker just by body language. And I think it's because that's exactly who I was and what I was during the time that I played. And I think if I would have thought just a little bit less about why decisions were being made, the explanation to decisions, talking to me about the decisions, why wasn't I approached about the decisions? If I left that whole section kind of off to the side and just focused more on the controllables, I think that, I just would have had a little bit more of a mental balance. And here's the thing, right? I could have everything that I'm asking for now and still be in the same place that I was when I played. But the reality is now being on the other side, I only wish I had some insight during that time, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you, and this might be more of like a meta question or just like us riffing off of each other, but so how do we like go about kind of bridging that gap, right? Like for an athlete understanding like, oh, from a coach's perspective, I love the analogy that you just gave too. Like your job is to make us lose sleep overnight, which is, I think like a good analogy, like it paints a picture, but on the flip side of that, like that is extremely stressful for a coach because that people, like obviously that's people that you're talking about, right? Like your job is so inherently
bad. Like happy.
Exactly. Yes. No matter what, you're going to have like really difficult decisions to make, really difficult conversations to have. And so what are some of those things? I don't know if you've like thought about this, but like, is it literally just having conversations, like kind of lowering that veil between athlete and coach and being like, hey, we know like you guys have a lot of things on your mind, but if it's helpful for you to like ask us questions and like have an open Q&A or like just know that you can come to us and then, ask us these questions, but then like following up is being like, this won't be judgmental. Like it doesn't affect you as a player or and me as a coach. Like, do you think the conversations there are enough, or is there like different practices that you would put in, say if we lived like in a perfect world, or if, in like in a space that we could do that? Do you think it's like conversations, or what do you think?
No, and I think it's a tough one, right? Because I think there's a balance of like, and I'm going to go back to my playing career for a minute. I've seen people that didn't play and handled it so well, and then I'd see after game 5, it was a very different story. Because at this point, it's like, has it just spiraled out of control? Am I ever going to step back on the field? Right. I've seen people that have stepped away for a game or two and were so great with their response, and were able to make their way back into the squad. And then I've seen people that never got pulled. Right. I've kind of seen it all amongst that, but I think there just has to be some sort of balance of expectations, and what those expectations are from each player, and the understanding that, I mean, truly everyone brings something different, right? I always say it, if everybody was the same, and it would be boring to watch and it would be boring to play. It's boring to play. And so I think it's less about the decisions and why the decisions are being made, and more about like, what do you specifically bring? Who are you? And I think a lot of times, and I spoke about this in my last podcast, when I was a player, I didn't really know who I was until I went to Japan, and the coach didn't speak English, and I had no idea. I had no opportunity to ask him, what am I actually good at? Who am I actually? Who do you see me as amongst this group? And for the first time, I had to answer those questions. And when I felt I got to answer them, I felt at peace with who I was and the understanding of who I was, so that when I was chosen and not chosen, I still had some identity within the sport of what I brought to the team, from a character perspective and a player perspective. And I think it's really important to be able to answer those questions, because I think that's part of the struggles that you go through when you start to process all the information. And, you know, do they not see what I bring? Right. Is what I bring not good enough? And I just think that it can be very, very tough. But I do think there has to be some level of respect too, amongst it, of, you may not agree with the decision, but you have to respect it.
Right.
And I think that all of those, amidst being a player, all of those amidst being a coach, can all be tough.
Yeah, that's the reality of it, right? Like, it's tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tough. And I think that's the part of professional sports that can do this, and that can feel really low and can feel really high. And I think if a player genuinely feels like they're in an environment where they're getting better, and they're in an environment that, if at any time they feel like they're constantly or consistently performing at practice, will they get a look? I think is probably one of the biggest pieces to it all. Because I think if there is some sort of light, in a sense, amongst the tunnel, I think you get the best out of people. And you don't know, that light could get further away, that light could get closer. It could be based off of injuries. It could be based off a million different things. But as long as you have that light shining, I think that's one of the most important things. And I must give a ton of credit for coming into this league and to be coaching for my first time at this level alongside someone like Scott, and the leadership that he is, and the leader that he is, and the leadership skills that he brings to this group. I just respect it so much. I always say it, I only wish I had an opportunity during my time to have played for someone like him. I think he does an incredible job keeping his doors open, and also laying the expectations down all amongst it. But it's a learning process all the time, right? And he's very, very, very transparent with that. Of, you know, we learn and we grow, and I couldn't ask for somebody better to just be alongside during my first experience at this level, because I truly believe it's allowed me to stay as consistent and as monotone as possible. Because even as a coach, you have the highs and the lows as well, right? And so I feel like he's just done an incredible job in that sense of trying to keep it as balanced as possible in every way. And that's just it. You know, I remember feeling it as a player where I wasn't picked, and I remember pouting at practice and being in this, like, you know, I'm not going to make eye contact. I'm not going to, you know, it's tough. It's tough. You feel a certain way about it, and it's tough not to see past that way that you feel about it. But like I said earlier in this podcast, and if I only had this insight of what actually goes into it and how much sleep is lost, making sure that you're trying to help collectively, you know, come to the decisions that are made. And you do them to the best of your ability. And that's truly the only reason why I can sleep at night, when I put my head down. But I'll tell you what, I've never lost more sleep in my entire life.
Oh my gosh,
um, but
that's crazy.
it's also a part of like caring for the people that you work
Mhm.
with, right? And I absolutely care and respect every single person I work with. And it's also the people you work, for
Yeah.
the players. And when you care about the players, you can't help but lose sleep about trying to figure out, am I doing everything right? Right. And that's always going to be the question. But I felt the stress as a player, and I felt the pressure as a player. And I definitely feel it as a coach. And I would say it's in such a different sense. And it feels more powerful.
Hmm.
It feels more powerful because I feel, in a sense, whatever the percentage is, responsible for these players, right?
Right. Yeah.
Even as an assistant coach. And so sometimes it can be incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing all of that. We're gonna continue to dive into it. And I feel like the point that you just brought up about like the pressure still being there, but having it take a different face or a different
Mm-hmm.
form. I mean, I even like I forget who I was speaking to. It might have been one of my coworkers, but um she was just yeah, it definitely was, because she was talking about how she was like at her son's game, like I think it was soccer game, and she was like, oh my god, I could barely watch, right? Like, because you're not able to like actually go out on the field and perform, like you're watching someone else perform for
Mm-hmm.
like the same goal, of course,
Yeah.
that you want them to do well and like obviously
Yeah.
win, right? And so I imagine, right, like the times that I have coach like at the amateur level is like, oh, like I want them to do well, but the culpability, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it was out of my hands in a sort, and like, right, because I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like they're the ones out there racing right now, right, or playing the game. And so like the extra, I think, cushion there, at least from my experience, I'm curious to see if you would agree, but like at least when I'm in a race or competing, my mind is like on that in the moment, right? Like it's not, it's loosely on the score and winning, but like
Yeah.
you can only have so much concentration elsewhere. So it's like you're kind of distracted from the end goal of racing and winning. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're a coach, you're like watching, you're analyzing everything on the whole field. Like it's a much more like bird's eye view of like, oh, I have the ball right now. This is what I have to do to score a goal. But when you're at the coach's perspective, you're like, okay, this, all these people are doing
Yeah.
that. Like you get over there, like, right, there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole network and an extra cushion, I think, because you like, you don't really have that distraction that is, I think, sometimes helpful when you're the player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those too, where it's like, okay, you're watching it in the moment and you're going, shoot, did I not explain it properly tactically throughout the week? One player is not executing it to know what I felt was, or what we felt was, how it should be. So it's like, it's one of those where it's like, did we not explain it well enough? Right. Or is it, this player's just having a rough day. Right. And I just think there's a lot of pieces that go into it, but you're right. It's when you're the player, and I can't quite describe the stress, right? They're the performers,
Mm-hmm.
and you're doing team meetings, you're doing team talks, you're doing team meals, you're doing team whatever at specific times, because you feel like, okay, this is the mental capacity they can handle. This is where they're going to need a meal according to sports science and blah, 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 right? You're doing all this stuff and then you get in, you're like, did we eat too early? We woke up earlier than normal, and you can't help but reflect on that entire itinerary and your training week, where, I feel like the player, and I believe that they're very, they can be very stressful in their own sense.
Mm-hmm.
I just haven't experienced this quite yet. And so I'm still quite new to it. So just seeing of like how many things you can actually go through to process why these several players were off, or why we were incredibly successful and had all 11 players in tune for 78 minutes. How do we get to 85 now with that same, we'll do everything the same the following week. And it's like, oh, we actually only got to 50. Why did we drop off? Right. And so you're just constantly in question of what you can do for the group, what you can do better for the individuals, what you can do for those small units, right?
Yeah.
And you're just constantly trying to figure it out. Whereas as a player, it's still just as stressful. It's still just as mentally taxing, physically taxing. But your focus is like, how do I get back in the group? How do I stay in the group? How do I help my teammates out around me? Right. And that's a whole piece too. But yeah, it's very different, but it's something that I'm also very grateful for. You know, I speak a lot right now in regards to like what some of the stress may be, but there's also some fantastic things, right? Like I mentioned earlier, seeing people's progress and their continued development, you know, whether they've been in the league for 6 years, 7 years, or whether it's their first year in the league. And they're making these small steps to see themselves out as, you know, possibly a big player in this league moving forward, and for the club. So yeah, I just think it's different, but it's something that I'm definitely very passionate about and very okay with different. It's how you find that balance. I just don't think, you know, I've mentioned this to you before. I just don't think a lot of coaches, I don't think it's a topic, coaches' mental health. And now that I'm on this side, I definitely feel like it should be a topic. It should be a topic that's openly discussed. What things, you know, help others, right? And their group. And, you know, essentially at the end of the day, you're an educator, right? You're a leader. And leading a lot of people is not easy. And you can only attempt to lead them the right way 24/7. And sometimes you're going to get that wrong, thinking that you're doing it right. And there's just a lot of ups and downs that go through it and go with it. But I think it's definitely something that should be a little bit more openly discussed, and something that I'm very passionate about, and people hearing more from coaches and what their experiences are, and how to further help these players, right? And I think that's a big key for me too. The reason why I'm in this position is because I loved being a player so much, and because I was so passionate about this league, and I know what these women deserve, and I want to be a part of what these women deserve. And through that, I've had some insight on the coaching side that I would like to share and be a part of as well. So yeah, I'm very grateful for this opportunity and these experiences. I only hope that through my coaching and this passion, I'm able to share with others.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so beautiful. Like, it just, I mean, hearing you speak, like, I'm like, oh my God, like, if we had conversations like this, just like so normalized, right? Like, being like, oh, it is very tough, but there's a way through, and there's a way, you know, like, as long as you acknowledge, like, oh, if I mess up, or like, we didn't go about this the right way, but let me kind of backtrack, like, apologize for that if it's necessary, and be like, oh, this is what I learned from it. Like, this is how we're moving forward. I think that's so special. And I think that's really what like unifies, you know, a team or just two people, in being like, oh, this is what we did. Like, we had this past experience and we can move forward with it together. And so I completely agree in that, like, it is more, I think it's more frequent now that athletes' mental health is coming into the picture in terms of conversations, and making sure that athletes' mental health is protected, and very much at the forefront of considerations when it comes to like practice times, and you know, diet and athletics, academics, how they play into each other and the person as a whole. But you're completely right in that I haven't ever really heard a coach talk about their own experiences with mental health. I think it's I don't know exactly what the reason for that is. I don't know if it's just because in athletics your mind tends to go to like the athlete, like you said earlier, is the performer. So like your mind is concentrated there. But a coach, if you don't have good leadership, it's almost more detrimental to a team, because that's the person that you're looking to tell all the performers what to do, how to work together to get to your end goal. And so my questions now for you, now that you have that insight into the coaching world, like, what would you say, why do you think, is there more conversations around the athlete perspective and less so around the coaching perspective? Because I have my own thoughts, which I'll share after. But I'm curious to hear what you'd have to say.
Yeah, and I think like I am so happy that these athlete conversations are occurring, because I also mentioned in the previous podcast that I didn't realize how mentally and physically drained I actually was until I retired.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, I hid a lot of things. I kept a lot of things down because um, I didn't want them to fester, and I didn't want them to boil into something that I felt was going to lead me in a not good direction, right? And I didn't realize how much I had to keep this level head all the time in order to. I mean, essentially, you're being asked every single day
Yeah.
to perform at the best of your ability, to not only challenge yourself and put yourself in a good position, but to do it for the betterment of the team. And so I am incredibly happy to see this mental health become more of a discussion amongst athletes. And I think it's incredibly special. I think it has to happen. I think, you need those people around you that will listen. If you don't have family members, do you have teammates? Do you have someone you can go to, right? And to feel that light be put back into your tunnel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the tunnel can just feel so long. And when you're
Yeah.
looking up, it's just so far ahead. But if you can find those people or person that kind of puts a light back in your tunnel, or lets you borrow a flashlight, or does a little lighter to put some light in there, whatever it is, right? I think it's really important that we find those people. And I think, in reference to your question about coaches, I'm not sure why that is. I wish I had an answer to it. I don't, but I know that during this time, I've only been on since last September, right, at this level coaching.
Yeah.
And I've just noticed that there's just no real discussion about it. And I didn't realize it until the last podcast and speaking that, I was referencing a lot as a former player and as a former athlete, and not a lot about as a coach, and the current battles that I feel like I go through when I'm tall and up on the hill, and when I'm low and down in the mud. It is just not, normalized in discussions and topics. And I don't know if it's, what specifically that is, but I just feel such a passion and such a calling for more discussions about it. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, I thank you for being honest. And like, I don't, right? Like, this is why I love these discussions, is because I don't think there's like any right answer, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're kind of just like speculating, like sharing insights or thoughts around it. And so I'll offer you this. My two best guesses, I think, would be, I think this is the forefront in my mind, is that like in leadership, I think there is the mentality of, if you're a role model, I shouldn't show the vulnerability or the aspect of like, hey, I messed up, or hey, I'm struggling, because then, your mind goes to, oh my gosh, they're not going to trust me, because they're now, if I show like that I'm struggling, or like I'm losing sleep and not taking care of
Yep.
myself, then if my team is seeing that, then they're not going to have, they're going to lose that belief in me, right? So
Yeah.
that's where my mind immediately goes, in that like, if,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so ironic, because if a coach or someone I trusted or a leader said that to me, I would be like, damn, that's really authentic, and I would appreciate that honesty, because I'm then like, I'm like, oh, like it's that human connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, that would be kind of my best guess. And the second one, I don't know exactly, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts of it just being like a generational thing, right? So like, if now, right, like I think about the kids I babysit, or like 16-year-olds who are in high school, and mental health is at, the pivotal point. Like, it is very focused in high schools right now, or at least the ones that
Yeah.
I grew up in. And so it's just more at the forefront of everyone's minds. And I think, mental health, it's a newer, there's a newer importance, or a newer heightened awareness for it. So that's where my mind also goes. Is it a generational thing where maybe a coach or a leader doesn't have the right vernacular or awareness of like how to even express
Mm-hmm.
what they're going through, to like really connect on that level with
Yeah.
athletes who might be way younger than them, right? Like, if you're teaching in high school and you've been a coach there for 30 years, there
Yeah.
is that age gap. So that would be kind of my two,
Yeah.
as I thought about it from our previous conversation, of what the reasoning behind that would be, because I haven't thought about like the coach's mental health aspect of it. And I'm honestly ashamed and shocked to not have thought about it, because I think it is like such a pivotal conversation to be had as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of those things that I don't think I'd ever be talking about it had I not been in this role. I think that's what's like, so surprising to me is, through these stories and these, these opportunities and platforms for people and athletes to discuss mental health, it's helping so many people across the world, right? To just have this open, forum and open opportunity to, wow, it is a real thing, right? And this is
Yeah.
truly how I feel. And I want to surround myself with people that can help me. And I want to hear, how to help myself, and I just have been really eye-opened to the fact that I just don't think that currently occurs for coaches, and I could be totally off, right? There could be all kinds of podcasts that exist out there. I just don't think it's an open discussion, and I'd say that both of your guesses, seem possibilities for sure, right? And it's tough when you're in a leadership position. There is some sort of like what is weakness, right? What is showing that you aren't a good enough leader? And I think that perspective's changing a lot. I think the brilliant leaders at the moment are the ones that are empathetic, that people go, they are humans, they do make mistakes, and they're the first to hold their hands up and say, I screwed up. I'm sorry. I thought I was doing, and that's where I come back to, if you feel in your heart that you're doing the right things for the people all the time, for the players that you coach all the time, you can't fault yourself, but you got to go through the learning process and the growing process and go, shoot, it just didn't work. This didn't grasp the group enough. Right. But I tried. I gave it everything I had amongst, that time frame that I had. And I think that's where it comes down to. I think that the best leaders in the world are those.
I would completely agree.
Right. Yeah. And that are okay to have those conversations of I messed up. And I think that, like you mentioned earlier, there's some sort of like, oh, well, here's the fact. Everybody messes up. Everybody messes up. Nobody's perfect. If we were perfect, it just wouldn't be, it's just not real, especially when it comes to it. I always told myself when I stepped on the field, I know I'm going to make mistakes today, but can I be the player that makes the least amount of mistakes? I always acknowledge the fact that I wasn't perfect. And I think it's so important. And I think it's really important that people see leaders that are not perfect, but that are good people and that understand what their role is and do their role to the best of their ability and are educated in their role. And I think it's very fine lines, but I think those are, at least in the short time that I've experienced, have been things that I would kind of check off of my checklist, if you will, in reference to being a good leader. But I don't think it's an open platform and open discussion at the moment of those conversations and of those, this just didn't work for me. I thought dating this player and it didn't at all. I thought, that these details would help this player, but turns out, they're just feeling like I'm, on them a bit much. And the whole time I'm thinking I'm inspiring them. Right. And I think that it's really important that we understand as coaches, athletes' mental health. And I do think on the reverse as well.
Yeah, no, I really am happy that I hope, we're part of the conversation that can speak it into existence, because I do think there's a very strong movement, like out of athletics as well, just being in the corporate world. Like I see CEOs who, and have one as my own, like who is so, is very strong believer in that movement, in that like, yes, everyone's going to mess up, like, right, part of life. And so the people who will really be happy and successful are the ones who can acknowledge that and be like confident in their mistakes and say, like, I thought I was doing the right thing and I wasn't. So we have to pivot as a team. And, I was leading the charge on that, but I learned at the same time, that you are learning. And so I'm really thankful that you kind of share that, that perspective, because it gives insight, right? So I hope like anyone who's listening to this, who athlete, coach, or neither, can see and start to perhaps understand, be empathetic. Maybe even like if you're an athlete, I encourage you to talk to your coach and be like, oh, I would love to hear what you think about this, or like, I would love to kind of bond with you about like mental health and how we're each taking care of each other, because at least like for me, those were some of the best practices, right? Is when everyone kind of is on the same page, like be like, okay, we all are unified by whatever this is, whatever this practice, if it went well, if it didn't, if this competition, whatever it is. But if there's that mutual trust there that you can then use, like in the really, in the moments when, to use your analogy, the light in the tunnel is a little bit dimmer, I think that connection and bonding with your team, it really just helps kind of everyone involved.
Yep. I completely agree.
Yeah. Well, this has been, this has been so fun. Bev, I'm so happy. This conversation has been great. And I hope, as a coach, you can go forward, have these conversations. I think you're a pioneer in the space. And I, just from talking to you, can tell how important it is to you to be supportive of your team as a whole, your other coaches and athletes. So I commend you, everything that you're doing. And I think we're headed in the right direction as far as taking care of everyone's mental health, a team's mental health, just like the world, right? Like everyone is a person. So I think the more we can acknowledge that and move forward with that in our mind, the better.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And I appreciate you creating platforms for these topics to be discussed. And like I said, you never know who you're inspiring. And I think you continuing to provide open conversations and opportunities for people to listen and to hear and to share is so incredibly important in today's world. And if we could all just learn a little bit more to listen a little bit more, I think the world will continue to be a better place. And the truth is, you never know what someone's going through. I think that it's very important that we continue to keep that perspective. But I appreciate you a lot. And I know you're inspiring a lot of people. So thank you for having me on today.